Ethan had lived on his ranch for so many years that the silence had become part of him. Every morning, he woke before sunrise, brewed coffee in the old tin pot, stepped outside, and looked at the wide fields stretching all the way to the horizon. The ranch was big, too big for one man, but he had never complained. He worked because work kept his mind busy. He fixed fences, cared for cattle, repaired the roof when it leaked, and checked the water pump when it acted stubborn. But after his parents passed away, the house felt lifeless. He had filled it with tools and supplies, but nothing filled the empty air inside. One day, after burning another pan trying to cook supper, Ethan finally admitted he needed help, not company, not friendship, just a cook who could save him from burnt meals and cold leftovers. So he rode to town, pinned a small written notice on the store's announcement board, and returned home, expecting no answer. But 3 days later, as he tightened a loose gate on the front pasture, he heard a buggy approaching. He wiped sweat from his forehead and walked toward the road. A young woman sat in the buggy, hands folded tightly in front of her. Her clothes were simple but clean, and she carried only one small bag beside her. The driver helped her down and tipped his hat to Ethan before riding off. The woman stood still for a moment, nervous, like she wasn't sure if she should speak first. "Are you Ethan?" she asked softly. He nodded. "You must be answering the notice." "Yes, my name is Clara." Her voice was quiet, almost unsure, but steady enough to show she had courage underneath her gentleness. Ethan wasn't used to talking much, so he simply stepped aside and said, "Come in. House is this way." Clara followed him across the yard. She noticed how clean the land was. Fences fixed, tools organized, paths swept by wind and boots. The man worked hard. She could tell. But the house, when she stepped inside, felt cold and empty, like no one had laughed inside it for years. Ethan showed her the kitchen first. You'd be cooking 3 meals a day. Nothing fancy needed. Just something warm. And you can use anything here. Quote. Clara nodded. "I can do that." He showed her the small guest room next. It had a bed, a dresser, and a single window that looked out to the barn. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, and she felt strangely safe there. "You can start whenever you're ready," Ethan said, rubbing the back of his neck. Clara smiled politely. "I'll start tonight." He nodded again and left her to settle in. She watched him walk out, straight-backed, quiet, and alone. Something about the way he moved told her he didn't talk much because he simply didn't know how anymore. By evening, Clara had cleaned the kitchen, washed the dusty dishes, and prepared a simple stew with fresh vegetables she found in a basket near the pantry. When Ethan walked in, surprised by the smell, he paused halfway through the door. "You cooked already?" he said. She nodded, suddenly nervous. "I hope it's all right." He tasted the stew and blinked, not expecting flavor. "It's good," he said. For him, that was high praise. Clara smiled with relief. They ate quietly, and when Ethan finished, he tipped his hat slightly, even though he wasn't wearing one. "Thank you," he said, then stepped outside for evening chores. Clara washed the dishes alone. The house was silent again, the kind of silence that presses against a person's ears. She had lived in busy places before, homes filled with noise, laughter, footsteps, and sometimes tension. This silence was different. It was the silence of a man who had forgotten what sound felt like. After finishing the dishes, Clara stayed in the kitchen to wipe the counters. She liked working at night. It gave her mind time to settle. Without thinking, she started humming a gentle tune her mother used to sing while cooking. The sound echoed softly in the empty house, bouncing lightly off the wooden walls. Ethan, in his bedroom across the hall, paused while taking off his boots. He wasn't sure at first if he was imagining it. It had been so long since he heard singing in his home that it felt unreal. But no, it was Clara's voice, soft and warm, filling the house like a candle in a dark room. He sat on the edge of his bed, boots half undone, listening without meaning to. The notes drifted to him, simple but full of something he hadn't felt in years: comfort. He didn't understand why her singing touched him so deeply. Maybe because it reminded him of evenings long ago when his mother hummed songs while baking bread. Maybe because he had spent too many nights with nothing but wind and loneliness. Or maybe because Clara's voice carried a kindness he didn't know he missed. He didn't move until the singing faded, and the house returned to silence. Only then did he finish removing his boots and lie down, staring at the ceiling. He had hired a cook for practical reasons. Nothing more. But now there was a soft voice in his house, and it stirred something in him that he didn't know how to name. The next morning, Clara woke early. She boiled water, made coffee, and fried eggs with herbs she found outside the kitchen door. When Ethan stepped in, he looked surprised again. She smiled a little when he tasted the food. "This is good," he said. The same simple words as last night. But this time, his voice sounded a bit warmer. After breakfast, Clara started cleaning the house, discovering layers of dust in corners that had been ignored for years. Ethan went out for chores but found himself finishing quicker than usual, as though he didn't want the house to feel too far away. Over the next few days, a quiet rhythm grew between them. Clara cooked, cleaned, and hummed while she worked. Ethan finished his chores and came inside earlier than usual, though he pretended it was because the weather looked uncertain even on sunny days. She noticed but didn't say anything. He noticed her noticing but pretended he didn't. At night, after supper, Clara cleaned the kitchen and hummed again, soft songs from memories she kept close to her heart. Ethan listened from the hallway or his room, never stepping in or interrupting. He wasn't sure if he wanted her to know he was listening. Some feelings were too new, too warm, too unfamiliar to put into words. One evening, Clara stood by the window, singing quietly as she washed dishes. The sky outside was turning orange, and the last light of day touched her face, making her look peaceful. Ethan watched from the doorway, unnoticed. Her song drifted through the kitchen, gentle and steady. He felt something inside him shift again, something strange and sweet. He had hired a cook because he needed help. But Clara brought something he didn't expect. Warmth, sound, and a presence that filled the empty spaces of his home. He didn't say anything, didn't show anything, but each night he found himself waiting for the sound of her voice, for the moment when her song would remind him that he was not alone anymore. The ranch was still quiet during the day, still wide and open and endless. But at night, when Clara sang, the silence finally broke, and Ethan, sitting awake in the dim light, realized he had brought more than just a cook into his life. Something gentle had started growing in the quiet corners of his heart, something he didn't yet understand but couldn't ignore. Clara woke before sunrise every morning, long before Ethan stepped outside for chores. She worked quietly, moving through the kitchen like someone who understood the rhythm of a home better than most people understood words. She prepared warm breakfast, boiled water, swept the floor, and opened the windows to let in the cool morning breeze. Slowly, the ranch house began to feel lived in again. Ethan began noticing little things each day: how Clara folded towels with care, how she arranged fresh-cut grass near the door to remove the smell of cattle, how she kept the fireplace clean and ready for cold nights. He had never asked for these things, but she did them anyway because she believed a home deserved attention. Her presence didn't disturb him. Instead, it wrapped around his daily life so naturally that he found himself listening for her footsteps or the soft clatter of dishes. One afternoon, a storm built over the hills. The wind grew sharp, and the clouds thickened. Ethan walked to the barn to check on the horses before the rain hit. Clara followed him with a coat, insisting he put it on. He didn't argue. He had grown used to her gentle reminders, and she had a way of speaking that made even stubborn men listen. By the time they reached the barn, the sky turned dark. The horses grew restless, stamping their hooves nervously. Ethan spoke to them in a calm voice, but one of the younger horses kept swinging its head and stepping aside. The storm thundered, and the horse jerked suddenly, nearly kicking the stall door. Clara stepped closer, humming softly under her breath in a tune. Ethan recognized the same gentle melody she sang while cleaning the kitchen at night. The sound floated between the wooden beams of the barn, soft but steady. To Ethan's surprise, the young horse calmed almost instantly, its breathing slowing as the thunder rumbled above. "You're good with animals," Ethan said, watching her. Clara looked shyly at the ground. "My mother used to sing to calm frightened animals. I learned from her." The storm grew stronger, rain pouring down in heavy sheets. The barn became their shelter, and Clara kept singing to the horses. Ethan leaned against a post, arms folded, pretending to check a saddle strap while listening to her voice drift through the air like a warm blanket on a cold night. For a long moment, he simply watched her. She looked so small and gentle beside the horses, but her voice held steady strength. Ethan felt a tug inside his chest, something he didn't fully recognize. He had never connected songs with comfort, not since childhood, but Clara's voice brought peace to places inside him he hadn't touched in years. When the storm finally softened, they returned to the house together. Clara's hair was damp from the rain, and her clothes clung lightly to her arms. Ethan opened the door for her without thinking, a gesture that surprised both of them. She thanked him softly, and they shared a quick, awkward smile before returning to their usual quiet routine. That night, the storm returned louder than before. The house shook with each crack of thunder, and the rain hammered against the windows. Clara stayed in the kitchen after supper, singing to distract herself from the sound. But this time, Ethan didn't stay hidden in his room or the hallway. He stepped into the kitchen and leaned against the wall, listening openly. "You always sing when the weather is loud," he said. Clara blushed slightly. "It helps me stay calm. I hope it doesn't disturb you." "It doesn't," he said. "It makes the house feel warmer." She didn't answer right away, but her eyes softened at his words. She continued her song, and Ethan stayed there longer than he meant to. There was something about her presence that made the storm outside feel less harsh. In the following days, Clara and Ethan settled into a comfortable rhythm. She accompanied him to the garden to help harvest vegetables. He taught her which tools were safe to use and which ones were better left untouched. When she struggled with a heavy bucket of water, he lifted it for her without saying a word, pretending it was no trouble at all. Clara thanked him each time with a shy smile that lingered a little too long. One warm afternoon, Clara was hanging clean laundry outside when Ethan returned from herding cattle. He watched her for a moment from the gate, the sun lighting her hair as she pinned the clothes one by one. She hummed softly again, always humming, as if music was part of her breath. Ethan found himself walking slower toward the house, just to hear her a little longer. Later that evening, they sat by the fireplace while the wind whispered outside. Ethan sharpened his tools, while Clara mended a torn apron. The room felt strangely peaceful. They didn't talk much, but silence felt different now, comfortable instead of empty. After a long, quiet moment, Clara spoke. "You live very far from town," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "I like the quiet, but it's a lot for one person. That's why I needed help." She looked into the fire. "I'm glad you hired me." He wasn't expecting that, and it made him pause. Clara continued. "I was worried I wouldn't fit in. But this place feels safe." He didn't say the words out loud, but he felt them. "Because you make it feel that way." A few days later, they traveled to town together to buy supplies. People stared. Ethan rarely came with anyone beside him. Clara could feel the curious eyes, and Ethan noticed her discomfort. Without saying anything, he walked a little closer to her, giving her a sense of protection in a place where she felt watched. They returned to the ranch with bags of flour, vegetables, and small items Clara had chosen to make the house feel more like a home. New cloth for curtains, oil for lamps, spices for cooking, Ethan helped her carry them, and she realized the rancher who once barely spoke was starting to show small bits of thoughtfulness that didn't match his serious look. That night, Clara made a special meal with the spices she bought. The warm smell filled the entire house, and when Ethan tasted it, he closed his eyes briefly. This tastes... He stopped, struggling to find the right word. Clara smiled gently. Better than before? He nodded. Much better. After dinner, Clara started her nightly cleaning. As always, she sang. But tonight, her voice was softer, deeper, carrying something more emotional than usual. Ethan was drawn to it, walking to the kitchen just to stand nearby. She turned around and caught him listening openly. For the first time, he didn't look away. You don't have to stop, he said. I didn't know you were there. I don't mind. Clara blushed slightly and began singing again. Ethan leaned against the table, crossing his arms, pretending he was only resting. But really, he was listening quietly, letting every note wash over him. When she finished, the house felt full of warmth. Clara turned to the sink, and Ethan slowly walked over to help dry the dishes. She stared at him in surprise. You don't have to help, she said gently. I know, he replied. But I want to. Her smile was small but beautiful, like the kind that grows slowly from the heart. As they worked side by side, Ethan felt something inside him growing day by day. A feeling he wasn't sure how to name yet. He had hired Clara as a cook. Nothing more. But now, he looked forward to her voice, her presence, her small steps around the house, and the way she made simple moments feel warm. Something had changed in his life, and although neither of them had said anything, both could feel it in the quiet moments between words. Clara woke with a heavy feeling in her chest the next morning. The sun rose like it always did, painting warm colors across the ranch fields, but something inside her felt unsettled. She worked in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with steady hands, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the small conversation she heard in town the day before. A trader had recognized the name she used before she came to the ranch. The words she overheard kept echoing in her head. She's the girl from the Miller place. They said she caused trouble, broke things, lied about it. They had to send her away. None of it was true. But people believed what they wanted. Clara had run from that life, hoping to find a place where no one would judge her for false stories. She didn't want Ethan to hear any of it. She didn't want him to look at her the way those people did. He had shown her more kindness in a few weeks than she had seen in years. The thought of losing that kindness made her heart twist painfully. As she set the table for breakfast, Ethan entered the room. He noticed her quiet expression immediately. He always did. He didn't speak much, but he noticed everything. You all right? He asked gently. Clara forced a small smile. Yes, just a little tired. Use. He didn't believe her, but he didn't push. That was something she admired about him. He never questioned her too hard. He simply waited for her to speak when she was ready. But today, she wasn't ready at all. They ate breakfast quietly. Ethan kept glancing at her between bites, noticing how she barely touched her food. She tried to act normal, but her hands shook slightly when she poured coffee. He wanted to ask what was wrong, but he didn't want to make her uncomfortable. After breakfast, Ethan went outside to work on the water pump. Clara washed the dishes slowly, her mind filled with fear. She remembered how her old employer blamed her for everything that went wrong in their house. A broken vase she never touched. Food she didn't prepare. Money that went missing. They accused her because she was quiet and alone, and she had no one to defend her. She feared the same thing would happen again if those rumors reached Ethan. She stepped outside to hang laundry, and her eyes drifted to the barn where Ethan was working. He stood in the sun, tools in hand, shoulders broad and strong. He looked like a man who carried a lot on his back, but still handled it with calm strength. She didn't want him to think she was trouble. She didn't want him to send her away. When Ethan returned for lunch, Clara had cooked but barely spoken. He watched her move around the kitchen with her head lowered. She wasn't humming. She wasn't smiling. She felt like a shadow of the Clara he had grown used to. Something was wrong, and he needed to understand what it was. After lunch, Ethan found her folding clothes near the window. The sunlight touched her hair, but she looked more fragile than ever. He approached her slowly, careful not to startle her. "Clara," he said, in a calm tone, "you can tell me if something's bothering you." She looked up and saw the concern in his eyes. It made her chest tighten. She wanted to tell him everything, but she feared he would think poorly of her. "I'm fine," she whispered. "You're not," he replied softly. "Not today." Her throat tightened. She set the folded shirt aside and sat down on the edge of the chair. Ethan stood in front of her. Not too close, but close enough to show he cared. Finally, tears gathered in her eyes. "Someone recognized me in town." Ethan felt his muscles tense. He didn't know what that meant yet, but he could tell it frightened her deeply. Clara continued. "They said things about me. Things that aren't true. They said I caused trouble, that I lied, that I ruined things. But I didn't. I just—" Her voice cracked. "I just worked quietly. They blamed me for everything because I had no one to speak for me." Ethan's jaw tightened, not in anger at her, but in anger at the idea that someone had treated her unfairly. She wiped her tears quickly. "I don't want you to think I'm a problem. I don't want you to regret hiring me." Ethan knelt slightly so he could look into her eyes. "Clara, you've done nothing wrong here. Nothing." His voice was steady and full of certainty. "You're honest. You work hard. You've made this house feel alive again." Clara looked down. "But people in town," they said. "People in town say things about everyone," he interrupted gently. She blinked in surprise. Ethan was a man of few words, but each one felt heavy with truth. "I've watched you," he continued. "I see the way you take care of this place. The way you calm the animals. The way you sing at night like you're giving the house a heartbeat." He paused, his voice softening even more. "I trust you. One. Clara's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who said things lightly. Every word he spoke came from deep inside him. "You're not sending me away?" she asked in a trembling voice. "Sending you away?" he repeated quietly. "Clara, why would I ever do that?" Her shoulders dropped with relief, and the tears finally spilled over. Ethan didn't touch her. He respected her space, but his presence alone felt like a warm shield around her. Clara gathered herself and took a deep breath. She felt safe. She felt understood, and something inside her began to open, like a door she had kept closed for too long. Later that evening, Clara cooked supper with a lighter heart. Ethan watched her move around the kitchen, humming gently again. He didn't speak, but he felt something growing inside him, something clearer now. Her voice had always touched him, but tonight, it reached deeper. He realized he didn't just admire her, he cared for her. After supper, Clara stepped outside to air out a blanket. The sky was painted with soft pink and gold colors. Ethan followed her without thinking, stopping beside her on the porch. "You don't have to be afraid here," he said quietly. Clara looked at him, her eyes warm with gratitude. "I believe you." Fine. They stood together watching the sky fade into evening colors. For the first time, the silence between them felt full of unspoken truth, full of gentle understanding, full of something neither of them had the courage to say yet. When Clara returned inside, she began singing again. The song was soft and tender, filled with emotion. Ethan sat near the doorway, listening openly, letting the gentle melody wash over him. He knew the truth now. He didn't hear her voice as a cook singing in the kitchen. He heard her voice as the woman he wished he could keep by his side. Her songs had changed his nights, changed his home, and changed something deep inside his heart. And he realized finally, clearly, that he yearned for her, not just as someone who worked in his house, but as someone he wanted in his life. Forever. The next few days moved gently, like warm wind drifting across the ranch fields. Clara returned to her usual routines, but something inside her felt different. She felt lighter, safer, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She no longer feared the sound of footsteps outside her door. She no longer worried about being judged for mistakes she never made. Ethan's words, simple, honest, and steady, kept echoing in her mind. I trust you. For Ethan, life changed quietly too. He woke each morning with a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with fences or cattle. He found himself looking forward to the sound of Clara's voice before he even stepped inside the house. When she moved through the kitchen, he watched without meaning to. When she spoke, he listened more deeply than he realized. Something had rooted itself inside him, slow but strong, like a seed finally waking after years of silence. But neither of them spoke their feelings aloud. Not yet. They both lived carefully, letting actions speak where words hesitated. One cool morning, Clara was hanging blankets in the yard when Ethan approached slowly, carrying a small wooden box. Clara paused and looked at him with curiosity. What's this? She asked gently. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, a habit he had when he felt shy. My mother's things, he said. Thought you might need them. Sewing needles, threads, some buttons. She used to fix everything with these. Clara opened the box softly, as if it held something sacred. Inside were spools of thread, old but colorful, neatly folded cloth, and a handwritten note with patterns his mother once used. Clara's eyes warmed. Thank you, she whispered. I'll take good care of them. I know you will, he said, his voice carrying a softness he rarely showed. Moments like these grew between them, quiet, meaningful, full of emotions neither had yet named. Later that week, Clara decided to make the house even warmer. She washed the windows until they shined, polished the wooden table, and used his mother's cloth to sew new covers for the cushions. Ethan returned from the fields and paused in the doorway, staring at the soft colors Clara had added to the room. It looks different, he said, surprised. Different good? She asked shyly. Different better, he said with a slow smile. Clara's cheeks warmed at his words. He didn't compliment often. When he did, it meant more than pages of poetry. As the sun set that evening, Clara prepared dinner, warm bread, stew, and a sweet dish she made using berries she found behind the barn. Ethan took a bite and blinked in surprise. This tastes like something my mother used to make, he said. Clara's heart softened. Then I'm happy. After dinner, Clara began singing softly as she cleaned the kitchen. Her voice filled the house like it always did. But tonight, something was different. Instead of singing alone, she felt someone behind her. When she turned slightly, she saw Ethan standing in the doorway. He didn't hide his listening anymore. He didn't pretend to be busy. He stood there openly, calmly, letting her voice wash over him. For the first time, she could see in his eyes how much those songs meant to him. You can sit, she said quietly, if you want. He nodded and sat at the table, watching her as she moved around the kitchen. Every note she sang wrapped around him like gentle warmth. He had lived years without music, but now he didn't want a single night without it. When she finished, the house fell into a soft stillness. Clara dried her hands and turned toward him. You're very quiet tonight, she said. I have something to say, he replied softly. Her heart skipped. He stood, walking toward her slowly, not wanting to startle her. When he stopped a few steps away, Clara felt her breath catch. He wasn't a man who talked much, so whatever he was about to say mattered. "I need to tell you something," he said. "About this house. About you." Clara waited, hands slightly shaking. "You came here as a cook," he said, voice calm and deep. "Someone to help with meals. Someone hired to keep things running. But that's not who you are to me now." Her eyes widened slightly, her breath tightening in her chest. He continued, "You've made this house feel alive again. You've brought laughter into rooms that were quiet for years. You've brought music, warmth, and peace. I didn't expect any of that. I didn't know how empty this place was until you filled it." Clara lowered her gaze, overwhelmed. "And," he said, gently lifting her chin with one hand so she would meet his eyes, "I don't hear your songs as just singing anymore. When you sing, I feel something I haven't felt in years, something I don't want to lose." Her eyes glistened, but they were not sad tears. They were warm, full of something that had been waiting quietly inside her heart. "I didn't think you noticed," she whispered. "I noticed everything," he said softly. Clara took a slow breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "I need to tell you something too," she said. "When I came here, I only wanted peace. A place where I wouldn't be blamed or scolded. I didn't know I would find safety, or kindness, or someone who listened to my songs even when I thought he was asleep." Ethan's chest tightened. "I watched you work," she continued, "and I felt calm. I felt like I belonged somewhere for the first time. And when you said you trusted me, it meant more than you know." For a moment, the only sound in the room was their breathing. Ethan stepped closer, carefully, giving her space to move if she needed. She didn't move away. "Clara," he said in a warm, low voice, "I don't want you here. As just a worker. Not anymore." She looked up at him, hope shining in her eyes. "I want you here," he said, "because this house is better with you in it. Because I'm better with you here. And because every night, when you sing, I find myself wishing you weren't just singing under this roof." Clara swallowed softly. "But singing as someone who belongs here," he added gently. She breathed out slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. But they were tears of relief, not fear. "I feel the same," she said. He exhaled deeply, as if he had been holding that breath for weeks. They didn't rush. They didn't step into anything too fast. They stood there quietly, letting their feelings settle around them. Ethan reached forward, gently, and held her hands. Clara let him, her fingers curling softly around his. For the first time, they stood not as an employer and cook, not as two lonely souls under the same roof, but as two people who had quietly grown into something deeper, something soft, honest, and warm. Later, they stepped outside to watch the night sky together. The moon glowed above the quiet ranch. Clara leaned lightly against Ethan's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her. Steady and protective. She hummed a gentle song only for him, and Ethan closed his eyes, letting it sink into his heart. The house behind them was no longer lonely. It was full of warmth, full of music, full of two hearts that had finally found a home in each other. Clara had arrived as a simple cook, but now she stayed as the woman whose voice made a lonely rancher yearn not for help, but for a wife who would sing under the same roof every night for the rest of their lives.